I jump every time she do that. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Self Black Men's Emotional Wellness Symposium. I'm your host, Courtney Brain, and we are at our third conversation today. We're looking at Black men's emotional wellness. We're deconstructing the high value man, and we're doing so through a lens of the koshas, or the five layers of self, according to yoga philosophy. We've talked about the physical body, we've talked about the breath body or energy body, and now we're heading into the mental body or the manomaya kosha. This is where there's more of the mind activity. This is where emotions are. And the topic for here is going to be under the umbrella of leadership. All right. And today I got Anthony Toney here with me. I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself and then we'll get into the discussion.
All right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, I guess, for you guys on the East Coast. It's really early over here on the West Coast. So, good morning to me. I'm Anthony. I put my information in the chat. I'm 35 years old. I am a resident director at a private university. I've spent a bulk of my professional work career with youth services, nonprofit work, at-risk youth, sexually exploited teens, everything from mental health to eating disorders. I've done it all. Um, but what I want to address today is male leadership. And so I think also let me start with, if I say anything that bothers someone or rubs you the wrong way, good, because I think that's where change and the shift can happen. um I'm agreeing to discuss certain things with people. But I think I have to make a note too that I'm not going to argue with somebody or debate somebody on certain things, especially when it comes to what it means to be a man and what it means to embody male leadership, because I think part of the space and part of the problem that we have is that it's been led by the wrong people. These conversations, these spaces have been in environments that they weren't for men, right? And so, or by men even. And so when that conversation starts there, I don't think it's as productive as when men, especially black men, do it themselves and then do it together. So a lot of the things that I say and I feel or believe, please feel free to, address those things. And my chat and my Instagram is always open. But Courtney knows too that I piss people off and I say certain things, and I'd be like, that's good. That's good, because if we mediocrity and being stagnant is where the community is at right now. And so what encourages those types of conversations? Having that same loop, right? And so if I come and say something that interrupts that, I'm not gonna feel bad about it. Um, and like I said, I'm willing to discuss certain things, but I'm not gonna argue or go back and forth about certain stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like you just kind of gave a trigger warning, but I think that there's no such thing as a safe space, in my personal opinion. I think spaces are only intentional. I hope that I set the precedence of the intention well enough with my presence, with trying to say, hey, these are the conversations that we're having. And one of the things that I respect about you so much is that you are sharing like your opinions, your beliefs, and you're putting those onto your Instagram. And you do so in a way that it's like we can have a conversation even if you don't agree with someone, you can have a conversation. And kind of like what you said, like if someone's not activated, by what's being said, that is where change begins to happen. And we're talking like we're not talking about something that I think maybe most people would be able to agree upon, which is even as Ade was just talking, we were talking about the importance of the black man breathing. Like if we recognize our power, then when we speak, we're speaking from a place of self knowing, of integrity, of self certainty. And we're speaking and behaving in a way that is cultivating community and accountability. And I think that this transitions so smoothly into speaking to leadership. Now, when we talk about leadership, let's start with what you're seeing in your line of work under the umbrella of the absence of Black male leadership.
I think it starts with kind of the point you made about there's no safe spaces. I think safe spaces has also been a term used to describe a space where there is no accountability because no one wants to be blamed, right? No one wants to be like, oh, that might have been my fault or look inward. And so I think that's kind of been coded in the language as what a safe space is too, is it's like I don't have to hold myself accountable. Or if we do hold ourselves accountable, it's with someone that we're paying, or it's like just between us and a therapist, more so in private. And I think community has been lacking that part of, well, if we don't even respect elders, elders were supposed to be the people that could hold you accountable. And even publicly, right? Where it was, you could get checked by an older person who had lived longer than you, experienced things more than you, and had more wisdom, right? And now we have this thing where we want to make amendments, we want to live in the gray, we want to, what I mean, we want to live free of that accountability to where we can't even be checked. And so I think um, there's generations now that are built upon that. It was slowly leaking and slowly coming out to where we don't hold each other accountable in community. We don't. And so if you have a community that is based around that now, where do you even begin to have certain conversations? Because people have been so, the norm now is, oh, I don't have to, or I don't know what that looks like to be able to say, hey, that's my bad. And so now we have a generation of men who don't even have to take ownership of the things that they do, but then they're also being blamed for certain things that, well, some of that might have been on your parents. But if your parents' generation didn't wasn't held accountable, how can we expect the kids to be held accountable? And then what do we expect for the generation after them? And so I see a lot of excuses. I see a lot of people's lives that are built on um, the framing of, oh, it's not my fault, it's my environment. Oh, it's not me, it was my ex. Oh, it's not me, it was the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, and all of these things, right? It was everything else. But what did you do? Did you choose to stay? Did you participate in that? Did you benefit from that for a little bit and then realize, oh, that wasn't the space for me, right? There wasn't putting a mirror back on people is makes them really uncomfortable. And I think we have a generation now where that uncomfortability people get to like run away from. And that's socially acceptable. And so I see a lot with college kids that I work with is that once you turn that mirror and you be like, well, like what part did you play in this? In your relationships and your academics, like what part did you play, even if you failed, right? Of like, can you pinpoint the moment where I could have did that better? I procrastinated. And then getting them to say that statement, right, out loud or to take, that's where accountability begins. But we've gone from where that is so like at the forefront to where I got to go through a lot of barriers to get to that conversation and I can just see it. And like that's not going to be good for community in the long run.
Now, when you mention like we used to have, or there's this, the elders, right, checking you, right? Where is respectful accountability and checking versus disrespectful? There's something here for respect. Like we had a respect for, damn, it ain't really no other way for me to put this, but like the leaders in my community growing up. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I hate like what this now represents, but like I grew up in Ferguson, and a lot of what we see as far as what Ferguson has looked like is not very representative of it. But we did look up to the older kids who were getting money or who were doing what we thought were cool, and we respected and valued their opinions. So if we're looking at a chain of leadership, these men, these older boys, adolescents, they had leadership over us as youth, but it seemed like there was like a missing component, whether that be from them, their elders, the men that weren't there, their fathers, father figures, the education system between them and those men. And then for me and the people that I grew up with, And somewhere along that line of I respect that person and this is who I look up to, this is who I want to be like. And then the education system, like doing what it does to people, to young men, especially like not having role models. That's all I saw. And they were doing things that they had no business doing, but nobody showed them. So, not to ask who's the blame or where the accountability comes in, but as I see where a lack of leadership has this trickle effect, I want to hear from you, like, if you have any reference points of the youth that you work with, especially young Black men, what are you seeing from them that symbolizes that they're even receptive to being checked or respectfully held accountable?
Well, they're not. That's the problem. And and I think if it goes back to accountability, like the moment you villainize what male leadership is and start to paint that gray or start to have women affirm what that is when they've never been a man a day in their life, we messed up. And I don't know who first did it or what generation, dropped the ball. Like I can't, the historical context, I can't go that far back. And, people like to go back to slavery and start there of like, oh, well, Black men never really had a chance because you can't, coming out of slavery, you can't take ownership of the family and land if you're seen as less than and those things and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, that's fine. But there also was a blueprint of what worked. And so I think once we don't have years of experiencing what that means, the complaints start of like, well, why are we behind or why are our communities lacking? And but if you look at that though too, the foundation is supposed to be male leadership. And so when you say that masculinity is toxic, when you say that being a man comes with all of these problematic things that you got to like be considerate of and take care of, well, you're also not saying what are the positives that come out of that? Like you're supposed to be the foundation for your family. There's nothing in that that says you're supposed to be perfect. There's nothing in there that says that you're supposed to be without fault and that you're not going to have things that you have to work on, right? There's there's this thing that we do where there's no participation trophy for life, but we try to give them out to like, oh well, you tried. Oh well, you did a good job. You might not have been the best parent, but you tried. And I think once again, living in that gray of like some things are you either did or you didn't. And men especially need to understand that um, when you're seen as a utility, when you're seen as men are often judged for what they can do for other people, for everyone else.
I want to speak to that because I you saw I posted on Instagram. I was asking like, what makes a man high value, and it was mostly women who replied. Like, there weren't any men. I think I made a different post that I got a man's response from, but so many. I think there were two responses from women that talked about what the man does for himself and who he is as a person. But everyone was like, yeah, he does this for me. He anticipates my needs and does that and that. And I was just like, yo, y'all are not helping at all. So I just wanted to throw that in there to iterate the point because me and you have talked about this, or we've been talking about things like this for a while, but specifically in that sense, man, and a lot of our value as men too being like, what can you do for me? And how you spoke earlier about you mentioned like being with the wrong men or looking at what you're getting out of the situation. And we talk about like there not being accountability there. I think what happens is we see that in the absence of leadership, we see that that breeds a seeking of leadership, and oftentimes in the wrong places, spaces, environments, and among the wrong people. Do you have anything else to say about that?
Yeah, like I don't want to hear from women. I don't want to hear from Black women about that because unless they're going to say, "Oh, I've chosen wrong before," and then this is what I've sought out now. Like a lot of those conversations and those comments that you're talking about came for like, oh, this is what a man does for me right now, or this is what my dad did for me and showed me. Well, that's great because those people are close to you and like they just haven't taken those things away as a resource. And so you're benefiting from what that man is and who that man is and what they can provide. That's different than understanding what a man is and what he's had to go through to get to that point. And so women often don't do that. Like they like to come to the finish line, right? And be like, "Oh, look at this man, this great person that I'm with." And they don't understand how you got there. They don't understand the sacrifice and the the L's that you had to take, right? And so oftentimes they don't even ask. And so I think that's once again going back to like the community norming that we have of, well, how can you be empathetic toward men if you're constantly judging them? If you have these standards, but then at the same time, you haven't even experienced that, or if you have, it was your dad, but then your dad didn't teach you how to choose men, or you didn't listen, right? And so there's things where you validated the wrong man. You had a baby with somebody who wasn't a leader in their own life. And so this goes back to even what I mean about male leadership. If you're not taking accountability in your own life, you have no business taking on someone else's, let alone a woman's. And then some of these people become fathers. And so this is what I mean, like male leadership is holding yourself accountable in your own life, having something to show for it. Women are not the purpose of your life. Sex is not the purpose of your life. And we have put these things so high, right? Of like who can have, like who can get it and who not, and do all these things. Your job as a man is to garner resources and be the best version of yourself. And we do not do that. We do not, as a community, we do not hold men accountable for that. Before we get to you being a father, before we get to you even being a husband, what are you doing as a single man? Because y'all want to be outside. Like you want to be outside. Well, that's fine. And then we do this thing of like just happenstance of like a few people get lucky, a few people get to have long-term marriage and successful families and two-parent households and things like that. A few of us do. They're outliers at this point. So how do we get to, oh, those people are outliers and not the norm when we're swimming in a pool of unsuccessful, unmarried, you know, bare minimum parents, co-parenting is the participation trophy of parenting. Like we've gone to where it's like, well, that's good because that's better than nothing. Why do black people do that? Black and brown, we've been doing that for years. When the blueprint is the standard, and we can say, oh, well, that's white people, and well, that's crazy that white people have been getting together for years and bringing in two incomes together, and they were just like, well, that's better than one income because apparently we want to have, less for our children as the norm and be okay with that. And so it goes all the way back to you cannot dismiss what it means to have male leadership. You can talk about toxic masculinity all you want to. If you throw out men, if you dismiss men, if you want to just say men are violent and all that jazz or whatever, you cripple the community. I don't care how you frame it, you cripple the community. Nothing good will come with that. And so you really got to talk about what it means to be a man and put men in position to do that. Not just say, oh, well, you can only do it if you're a good man. The average man is going to have faults. Everybody does. I don't care if you make six figures, right? Like you're going to have faults. You're going to have growth points. You're going to have all these things. And so what does it mean to internalize and look at yourself and be like, hey, this is what I need to work on as a man before I get to a certain position in my life, before I garner, what it means to have a family and to raise children, because we've just done the let's throw it all up in the air and hope it lands somewhere, right? We've tossed out things, we've villainized things, we've even I don't even think it's easy to define a good man or a bad man, but we like to have that conversation. And I'll leave with I'll leave it at this as like people like to talk about men being violent, right? And that violence, especially when it's toward women, is just it's wrong, and we throw out men because of it. That same level of violence is what men use to go to war and defend a country. That same violence is what men use to defend their home and their children. You can't separate them, right? And so if someone makes an active choice to use that violence for harm and to like hurt innocent people and things like that, is that person's choice. That does not dictate what all men do. That does not dictate what that all men are, right? And so I think we also don't have that conversation in these spaces enough of to where that same level of violence is the same level of violence I would use to protect my sister, to protect my mom, to protect my wife and my kids. They're not separate. My ability to hurt somebody else is because I'm a man. And so, what I mean, like it's part of that. And so, and it also leads to what competition means, right? And so men are supposed to compete with each other. They're not supposed to kill each other. Men are supposed to compete with each other. And so, and it's supposed to be that driving force of like, you know, it rises to the top. And so even if you, uh, the last example, right, of like people that played during the Michael Jordan era, well, those people weren't bums, right? Michael Jordan was just better. Michael Jordan was on the team that beat them. But there's Hall of Famers that were in that era that never got a championship. That doesn't mean they were trash, right? It just means another man was better. Do we didn't invalidate those men? Do we then say like, oh, Karl Malone and John Stockton weren't anything ever? Like, no. And so that's the example of what I have of like you can be really, really good and still not quote unquote be the best. And I think men also need to understand that, like, if you look at success like that, if you're striving to be something and you have goals and you have a purpose, that is what you need to do. And you need to constantly be working towards that every day.
Now, we have some messages in the chat. I would like to, at the end, be able to give the opportunity for the engagement here, but I want to make sure that we at least have enough of a flow for us to like have more foundation of where we jump in, agree, disagree, make comments. So, one of the things that I want to make sure to ask about here is we're seeing in the spaces where we're talking about high value men and that being so much like externally driven, you're speaking to things that are more like self accountability. Like you need to essentially know yourself and what you're striving for. One of the beefs that I have is that when you look at this manosphere YouTube content, it's you need to be tall, you need to be physically attractive, have this, have that, have this much money, make this. And these are things that men are striving for in some areas where they will never be able to do all of those things. So maybe they overcompensate in others. And this is where you speak about like that the competitiveness, the hyper or toxic masculinity, or being like an over expression of masculinity in violent ways, in unnecessary ways, right? So, oh, I'm not 6 feet tall. I'm gonna make a fuck ton of money. I'm gonna make a fuck ton of money by doing some fuck ton of unethical shit. And because I'm so entitled and I have so much accumulated, I can rationalize. I can do it because I can, just because I can, right? So that same masculinity in that expression, someone who can like exert power, who can like, all right, I can make a fuck ton of money, but that's not what's aligned for me. It's more important that I make an impact. So maybe that doesn't look like meeting this criteria of 6 figures, but I'm able to, take care of what I need. I'm able to take care of the people around me. And that's like an inherent drive. I don't know any man who doesn't take care of the people, or who doesn't want to. Let me not say that shit. Who doesn't want to take care of everybody around him. Not everyone can, but in striving for these sometimes unattainable like metrics of success, I think that one of the aspects of leadership looks like recognizing who you are, where you are, and like what sport you're in. Like just because Michael Jordan could play basketball, that doesn't mean he can play baseball, right? So if we look at it from a sports perspective, we've got soccer, hockey, football, basketball, baseball. Let's use those as examples. If I have the skill set of a hockey player, just because I can skate may not mean that I can run fast or shoot a basket, right? So a lot of us are playing a game that we aren't built at, and we're trying to learn and accumulate the skills of so that we can play that game. But all of the skills across the board, it's sports. If you understand sports, you can understand hockey and aspects of it and take that into your existence. You can understand baseball, you can understand soccer, basketball, and football, right? And you can take the skill sets of each of these and go in your own fucking direction of what it means for you to be high value. And all of this comes with leadership skills that are going to help you in other areas of your life. So
Well,
speaking
wait, because you mentioned the 666 rule, and my thing is like, where does that come
can you say
from?
what that is? Can you say what that is?
Oh, 6 feet, 6 inches, six figures. But like, who has validated that? And this is what I mean about what male leadership actually is and what male accountability is, because women have selected those things and said that they were important or chosen them. And so there's nothing about character in the 666 rule. There's nothing about being responsible in the 666 rule. There's nothing about, oh, this person may have the potential to be a great father in the 666 rule, right? So they're all majority superficial things. 6 feet, 6 inches, six figures. Well, it doesn't say, well, I care that you get the six figures legally, right? I care that the like it doesn't say that, right? And so when you're talking about that rule and those things, who has validated that? Well, if women never validated that, men weren't going to do it, or they wouldn't care as much. And so we've also said that like those things are important to compete for or compete with. And so because you will get women. And this is what I mean of like part of male leadership as the brotherhood or men's groups and things like that takes away the fact that like, well, if we're all in here, we're not talking about that. Well, I've never talked about the 666 rule with other men as far as like, oh, this is what you should be doing. You know what I mean? I've never done that. And I don't know a lot of spaces where they're productive, where other men would put that onus on other men, because that's not helpful unless you want views or unless you want to cause,
Yeah, don't get me started on you shit. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, right. But I'm saying like, so I'm saying, where does that energy come from? That comes from, well, if you get some of those things, two out of the three, you'll get women. And so we put women now at the like ahead of your purpose. We put women ahead of what it means to be a man of integrity, what it means to have male leadership. We put women above that. We put sex above that. And once you do that, you fuck it all up. And so like you have to suffer the consequences in community of what that means, because then you have, if women said, "Oh, well I want men to have a certain level of character before I make them a father, before I have sex with them." We're changing the dynamic and the norming of what we have, right? But people don't understand that you validate a lot of things with sex, men and women. And so even going to where we had a statement that we talked about before this conversation, but men having standards is also villainized. I've told men, raise your standards. And I've had people come at me and be like, oh, can't do that, and da da da, because women don't like to be rejected. And I'm not trying to like talk about them in general as much, but in general, women do not like to be rejected. But if you had Black men with a certain level of accountability and raising their standards, that also means that some women won't make it, which we don't like to talk about. We don't like to have that conversation, right? Because I guess every person deserves love and deserves to get married. I don't think that's true. And so there's things where and I don't want to withhold those things for people that are just successful. And so when I talk in general, I'm also talking about the average man where the best version of yourself might not be making six figures. That doesn't mean you ain't shit. Like, we need to stop doing that in our community and stop shaming men for not having XYZ if they're doing the best they can. And the best they can might be having a consistent 9 to 5 job that is not breaking the law, and they are going to the gym every day or taking care of themselves and their body and whatever. Like, we're not going to talk about who deserves and doesn't deserve certain things, because once again, once you do that, you displace people in community, you accidentally cancel people in community, and I don't think that that's right. And so, yeah, the 666 rule is kind of, it's a very superficial way of looking at it, but that comes out of that red pill manosphere space, where once again, where's the purpose in that? Where's the purpose for men to, because everybody can't make six figures. The economy would literally would blow up. Everybody cannot make six figures in America. So where does that leave the people that just make 70, 80, 60, 50? Like, are they just supposed to be, are they bums now? Like, what? Like, you know what I mean?
Speaking to the metrics that we're striving for, right? So you mentioned that the 666 rule being something that men don't validate. So now we're speaking to also the importance of men holding each other accountable, men in community with one another, which was also something that Ade was talking about. And I saw some comments about empathy and sensitivity. I didn't want to like not be listening to what you're saying to address it. But I think that there is the way that we see empathy, perfect example, locker room. The locker room, I think, is what I grieve the most about having played sports, because of what happened that people don't see. You see the scoreboard board. If you're watching a football game, you see the scoreboard, you see count passes, drop passes. I know those men. I know those men's characters. Dropping a ball, getting yards, that's what other people base their value on. And I think that this sports is a really beautiful analogy, because what the stat sheets show, it's just that, what they do, what the performance is. What the stat sheets don't show is who these men are in the locker room. Like, oh damn, you dropped something here, man. Let me get that for you. Oh yeah, we're going to do this afterwards. You want to come through? Hey, what's wrong? Like, what do we? Damn, bro, you sad. Holding each other when we cry. That's the only time that it's been okay to like cry in front of a man. And it's been the men who are, as we talk about, like you mentioned earlier, like women waiting at the finish line and seeing the finished product. I think that a lot of men not having similar experiences of like struggling in community with men, fighting among men, like we done swung on each other, we done had fights broken up. Sometimes it's just been like, hey, we got let them fight it out, they'll be all right, and then shake hands at the end of it. And at some point we recognize that sense of purpose, that goal that we're working towards, winning the championship, right? This is where we come together. We can have these disagreements. We might have to throw hands. It's not always necessary, but I don't want to just like seemingly dismiss the fact that there's not empathy, especially as it relates to leadership. But there's also this self-restraint. There's also accountability. There's also the empathy of knowing, oh, he didn't like that. Or, oh, he don't like that. And we take this out into the world with us. Like, I'm always scanning my surroundings, and it's little things like not wanting to have my back to the door. I can look and pinpoint who look like they might shoot this bitch up, who look like they ain't supposed to be here, like what these judgments that kind of have to be made. I think is also an expression of empathy or sensitivity, being aware of surroundings. So when we talk about leadership, I think that it's important that we speak to spaces that are supposed to nurture leadership and a lot of these values, such as empathy that we're talking about here. And these spaces have been demonized because of what we said, like no one's perfect. So a thing happens and we sort of minimize it to being under the toxicity of being an athlete. Oh, he's an athlete because so that means all these things. Antonio Brown is not the same athlete as, one of these defensive linemen who run nonprofits, getting kids shoes and putting them into or supporting these like adoption agencies and foster care programs, right? So I just felt a need to share that there is empathy that is also it's on the same spectrum of where we see negative expressions of masculinity and positive expressions of masculinity, if that's even the way of saying it.
Yeah, well, because I don't believe that masculinity is toxic. And
And say more about that. I
yeah,
mean, I
and
think we should.
I don't because this is what I mean of like if you can't experience what it means, it's part of being a man. Like everybody has good, bad, ugly. Everybody has that. Women have that, but we don't talk about toxic femininity. Like we don't talk about the times that like, well, who's more prone to crash out emotionally and do some things and then say, well, I was just really, really angry or upset, right? And just cry or whatever. And you know what I mean? Like everybody has that side of them, man or woman. And so why do men and masculinity get villainized as being like the forefront of just like, oh well, if they're violent or if they're angry and the angry black men, so all that jazz, and like, oh, this is why most of us are in jail and da da da. Also, the conversation for even I would even say being empathetic, a lot of if we're going to be honest, a lot of black women start that conversation when black men are abused by police. It didn't. Uh,
We still here.
oh, sorry, my someone called me. Something. Anyway, but yeah, when black men are abused by police, it didn't start before that, right? People didn't care, like, oh, how are men doing? How are black men doing in the community? As soon as police brutality became a thing and Black Lives Matter, all that jazz, then the conversation, even therapy. And you see, and you were around during the heyday of when dating apps were at an all-time high and you could say certain things and make certain statements to get laid. And this is where I'm going to be real honest about certain things. We was around when you could say, oh yeah, I've experienced therapy. A woman wouldn't think twice and just be like, all right, bet, validated. You could say you had experience with BDSM, validated. Like, oh, it must be he's experienced that space, or he says he has. You didn't have to share any sources. You didn't have to be like, oh, this is what it means to be a responsible dom or understand what it meant. You should just say things, right? Validated. We was around where people would put feminists in their profile to get laid. We didn't hold people accountable for what that actually meant, what that actually meant to create safe spaces for women and men in general. Like we didn't do that, right? And so we played that game. People got screwed over. Some people clearly lied, right? But there's also people that still remain in this space that do the exact same thing and started there with being just used car salesmen. And so here we are today with when I say a statement like dating is dead, people go, oh, it is. Dating is dead. There ain't no dating. Sex is monetized. Y'all you can play that game if you want to, but sex is monetized. You are not raised to be a wife or a husband. So it's not a learn as you go along and like, oh, you'll figure it out or wait until your 30s and it'll work out. No, someone who lied to you. Who lied to you?
We go, hey, hold on. So we drifting off the leadership conversation. I understand how it's connected. We ain't got time. I want for everybody to be able to engage too. So if we have to, because we got behind on schedule a little bit, I encourage and you encourage this too for people to engage with you, especially on Instagram.
Yeah, for
All
sure.
right, dope. Um, I wrote down, oh, so as we talk about dating is dead. Fuck, I do have to go here. Okay. Dating is dead as a conversation. We mentioned that you'll see men who would say these key phrases and buzzwords that would essentially get them laid or get them the results. And I don't know if this is where you were getting to, but like these men being rewarded for bad behavior like that, and then the men who might have more of that integrity or be better fits being punished or seen as these men are and having to deal with the consequences, right? I think about that Pop the Balloon show. Do you see that at all?
Yeah, I've seen it.
And on this show, like you'll see where men are, and society's like pushing this shit into our faces too. You'll see like a man who's, presenting himself well, who's well spoken, and they'll show these women, and it's usually they'll show the black women especially as popping their balloon because I don't like how you dress, like your clothes fit, or I don't like how you talk. I don't like that that you got a good job. Like I need somebody who's, and then we set these unrealistic expectations, and I think
No,
that
no,
a lot.
no, 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 no. See, wait. It's not just the setting of the expectations, it's the norming. It's the men on that show that have worked hard to be a whole doctor, and then someone can say, "Oh, I don't like the way you said balloon." To invalidate that person and you know what I mean? Like just stupid shit where I'm like, well, if everybody gets to do that in community, we have lost. We are going nowhere because if you didn't have an elder woman sit there and look at you and be like, you're dumb. You are dumb, right? And that doesn't mean that every man deserves to be chosen and pre-selected and all that jazz. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that like the rationale for that being okay, you're literally saying, well, I really don't care about the future of community. I care more about my preferences, or I care more about like what I want and not what I might need. Or you don't understand yourself enough to even be outside in the first place. Because to invalidate a doctor or somebody that has worked hard to be where they're at and you know what I mean, to like say, oh, I don't like the way your belt is. We've lost. We've lost, and I don't see how anybody can sit there and be like, "Oh, well, women get to change their mind and do all that jazz." No, what message are you sending?
And that's
What
what
you
I mean. Like
what are you telling your daughters, and what are you telling your sons? Are you like, I don't want to live in that world personally,
there,
but
there's a thing you've said too, and timing wise, I want to be sensitive of the time, so I might have to interrupt you. But you said that sex positivity does nothing for the black family, and this show as an example of the media pushing like this is what women want. Like, how much of this is what media is saying versus what the culture is saying because they reflect one another. And most of the men I know who are married, who are in relationships, like they don't know about any of this shit. Like they're taking care of home. And these as examples of who would be great leaders of community or examples of being in community or for role models for us to look up to as leaders, they ain't got time for that shit. And that's a whole foreign world to them. I talked to my friend about some of the stuff that I see. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Right. So the question being, how much of this is what it really is versus how it's being packaged towards into our spaces? Like what's triggering what, or is it just that infinity sign of them feeding each other? Because I don't think that's the reality. I think that that's
but the reality is, Courtney, that we've never had a problem having sex with each other or having kids before marriage. What have we had a problem with? Getting married, staying married, having two parent households. Those those are what we've had. We haven't had a long-standing history of. We've not had it. And so how do you go and how do you talk about dating and not talk about, well, this is what has gone wrong. If more than half of black children are born into single parent households, you don't get to just say, oh, that's the men's fault and all those men left. No, you don't get to do that if you understand how family court works. You don't get to do that. You don't get to say that, right? Because how many of those relationships that had children, how many of them were married before they carried? So if you answer that question and you think, oh, well, most of them were, no, they weren't. No, they weren't. So that by definition means y'all decided to bring a child into the world and you weren't even together.
Now, let me ask this too. So, what's the weight that we're putting here on to being married before having a family? Are we talking about like looking at a person's investment in each other? Why are we emphasizing marriage here? Just to clarify.
The only reason I emphasize marriage is because Black people, Black and brown people, have historically not done the blueprint consistently. So the way that you started a family was you got married. Family planning wasn't doing it out of order and then planning for success after, right? It was, what do we need to do in line that can help give our kids the best potential for success as possible? Well, if you have them born into a single parent household, you already are at a deficit. So you're saying it's okay for my child to be lacking as soon as they come out into this world. And we've said that's okay. You can do it. You can just have, male leadership and male essence around your child, right? You could
Right.
just you
That was
could
it.
just oh, what happened?
Saw a camera pop up, and I'm traumatized from what happened earlier. That's all.
Oh,
So, please continue. My
yeah,
bad.
yeah.
I'll
Where
just
yeah,
so
we have validated the wrong things and normed the wrong things without going back into saying where were the elders that would say that's not the way that you do that, right? Who was going to check who and say, hey, you need to marry before you carry, period. That's the norm we should have. Y'all should not be having children out of wedlock. That's not good for Black kids and success. It's not good for the community, blah, blah, blah. We don't do that enough. And then we decide, well, let's talk about having sex with each other.
so looking at you mentioned how people don't understand how the family court systems work, and we look at what they say on Red Pill, like how marriage does nothing for men, right? So now we're looking at marriage as being a state a baseline for bringing the family in. Are you speaking from like statistically this is what's worked, or are we speaking from something different than that?
I'm
Just to,
what has worked and how economics works. Two incomes are better than one. Simple math.
all
Like,
right.
you know what I mean? Simple. I'm not getting into like the deep seated like, oh, people incompatibility and all that. No, 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 no. Like two parent households, right? That's the launching pad for success. Argue with your mama, not me. If you come from a single parent background, you are lacking. That is a deficit. It's not to say that you will just ultimately be a failure. I'm not saying that. It's not even to say that you will, like your chances of success are higher than no, right? It's saying you do better with a two-parent household. And what has the Black community consistently not had? Two-parent household.
And court systems, capitalism, like what if we are pointing the finger at anything, I I really do think that leadership plays a big role in this because I think that my I'll just speak from my experience. I don't want to generalize, but speaking from the experience of having had coaches, having had teammates, and being around boys becoming men and being around coaches who are men like guiding us, I think that there's been things embedded in me that my mother couldn't give me, such as little shit
Oh,
like
you got to say it, Courtney. I'll say it. Women cannot raise men. You can't. You can
every
raise
we know
citizens.
this.
You
We
can
know
raise
this.
citizens, and it makes them see. This is one thing. It's another statement that'll make you upset. Good. Women cannot raise men. You can't. My mother could not raise me to be a man in her single parent home with my three other siblings. I had to become a man outside of my mother's house. That was just the burden of whatever that I had to deal with after leaving my mother's home because she couldn't do that. Nurturing does not do that. That it doesn't do that. And my mom can't grow a dick and raise me to be a man. She could teach me right from wrong, but she can't teach me to be a man. And so this is why I think we have to come to terms with that. We have to hold ourselves accountable. We can't be like, oh, that doesn't sound nice, or that's not true. No, you can't raise a man. You can't. Not sorry either, because we have dismissed what it means to actually have a man in the home and male leadership. You can't replace it. You can't replace it with child support. You can't replace it with a grandpa. You can't replace it with an uncle. You can't replace it with a really good male friend that you think is going to be around to help raise your child. No. We need black dads. You need black husbands. You need to see it. Black love is not one-sided. Right? And so it's very like it's crazy to me that as a community we have ignored this, but then we want to talk about red pill and manosphere. Where does that come from? That becomes popular when you don't address the things in your community and take them seriously. Because then those boys that you thought were going to be okay with their single moms go to that content on YouTube and be like, oh, I never was told this. No one talked to me about that. Or I only heard that when we was in the locker room. Never heard that at home. So what becomes more appealing? Where all the men are at, where all the boys are at. Right? That's how you get an Andrew Tate. They don't just manifest and come out of nowhere. He had to be saying something that what? Oh, that must be like really interesting to some people. And so it's the neglect, right? It's the dismissal of, well, we didn't really talk about the lack of male leadership and men in the home. And then we want to address, oh, now it's a problem because they're being toxic and they're getting together and they're talking about the 666 rule and all of those things. And we don't like that. And if they raise their standards, they're doing, you got to go all the way back then to when you thought it was okay for over half of black children to be born into single parent households. And you just thought, oh, we can make this work. All right. Okay. Look at you now. There's consequences to everything. And so when I talk about holding men accountable and other men holding men accountable, that's what I'm talking about. You should always be challenging yourself to be a better man every day. You should have a goal and a purpose. I switch them out every month. It's just part of the thing that I do. You see that I did no sugar November this month. That was just to challenge myself to look at my diet, address it, read labels, and look at things. I wasn't doing, and people said, "Oh, well, how could you do that? You're gonna do that during Thanksgiving?" Yes, Thanksgiving is one fucking day out of the month. I cannot eat pie or not eat sugar for one fucking day out of the month. Yay! And people are like, "Oh, I don't have that level of self-discipline," or I wish that. This is the problem. Right?
Wait,
This is the problem.
you telling me you ain't eat Thanksgiving food?
No, I didn't eat like pie. I didn't have no pie. I mean, no pie, no sugar, no extra. Yeah. And
We
so,
talking extra sugar or sugar? It's me holding you accountable now. You said no sugar,
yeah,
so what was
no
the
sugar, no
what was
sugar.
the what was the ham glazed with?
I didn't have ham, turkey.
Oh, all
Yeah,
right.
yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, but this is what I mean of like that shouldn't be out of the ordinary, right? And that was inspiring to other people, or that was you should be having something for you every month as a man that you are pushing yourself. And there is way too much shit out there as resources, the internet, whatever have you. Learn a language. What is promises to yourself that you have not kept? If it is getting in shape, if it is getting another job to make more money, is it developing a hobby that could potentially save you during a pandemic in later years, right? That you don't anticipate happening. What is it that you're not doing to be a better man and a better version of yourself? Because that's the type of conversation and accountability that I'm trying to have, not this whole blame game and like, oh, this is where we're here now and this is what's attractive and not attractive. I don't care. I don't care because men are not being men.
Now, as we come to a closing, um, in what ways in your own life are you cultivating and exemplifying leadership?
It is part of the advocacy that I have for youth work and things that I have developed to where not only do I make a living, but it's embedded in my everyday life. And so whether it's leading a men's share group, which is exactly what I call it, a men's share group, where I start every meeting with just How are you doing? Because once again, we pushed on, oh, go to therapy and, talk to so and so and blah, blah, blah. A group of men and just asking them how they're doing and getting an honest response is therapeutic. Having a share space where if you're having a bad day, bad week, bad month, and you can be around other men and share that, and they can say, oh, I can relate to that. Or this is what I did when I had my bad day, bad week, bad month, right? This is some healthy coping skills, or this is what you need to do to handle that, is therapeutic. And I don't have to be a professional psychologist or whatever, I have my doctorate to understand that. And so I've seen it. And so when you give that opportunity to youth, when you give that opportunity to college men, like it's important. It's important to have those spaces. And so I don't think they can be separate from mental health. I don't think they can be separate from um, therapeutic practices. And so that is embedded in my work and work that I do every day. And then also holding myself accountable. I talked to my grandpa yesterday about, I don't know what I told him, I was like, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to say tomorrow. And, I looked at my grandpa as one of the most patient men I have ever known. And a person that had been married or has been married for 55 years, right? And so the blueprint, once again, of, well, if I say certain statements, what backs it up? Because if the goal is never to have healthy, sustainable relationships, then we can't talk about what men aren't doing, because it starts with the men being men and men setting the standard and setting the practices in their own lives before they take on other responsibilities to have that longevity, to have that health, to understand what it means to be single in your off season and working on yourselves and being better. You have no business taking on a woman, being a father, doing these things if you are not showing male leadership in your day-to-day life. I don't care if it's not validated by other women. That's not the point. I don't care if they're not having sex with you. I don't care. If you are not doing what you need to do, how are we going to talk about what women aren't doing? You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't make sense to me to even, to do that. And so because people are out of shape, people aren't the best versions of themselves, people aren't making enough money and aren't garnering enough resources. They aren't doing those things. And so who are you going to listen to? And so, like, every man should have a purpose. I can't tell another man what that purpose is, but I can tell you need one. I can't tell you what it means for you to create your own goals every month and that you should have something that you strive for. And it certainly is not sex, right? But I can share, hey, this is important. And that part of life is suffering. We like to applaud and cheer on during the good times and, like, let people know that, like, oh, look at them and the vacations and all the things. Like, where is the struggle? Growing pains, where are those things where we say just as much as, like, it's really good that they worked through X. It's really good that they came to a point in their relationship where it's like, hey, I'm not getting what I need, you're not getting what you need. How can we make this work? You know what I mean? Like, how can we have an honest conversation about our needs? Who leads that conversation? Right? And so if you're able to be emotionally intelligent and in tune with yourself and be able to set those boundaries and enforce them, not just speak them, right? That's part of male leadership. If you're talking about understanding women and not trying to change them, that's part of male leadership, because you can't do both. And you will never change women. I don't care how much money you make. I don't care how much, how tall you are. You will never change women. And so part of male leadership to me is understanding women. I mean, in order to do that, you have to understand yourself, and you have to be a man that has standards, that has purpose, that sets goals, and that holds themselves accountable and holds, and because that all goes back to community. If you have male leadership and it holds it accountable, the community thrives, right? It's a launching pad for success. That doesn't mean we don't need women. It doesn't mean women don't have a voice. I'm not saying that. Never said that. But I'm saying is like if you have strong male leadership, then women have something to follow. Women have something that they don't mind, right, attaching themselves to and supporting, because that's what it's supposed to be like. Partnership, right, is supposed to be like. I'm not supposed to question. You're not supposed to question who this man is, or constantly questioning and like what they're doing and how they got there. That's not part of the. That shouldn't be part of the process. And so, just understanding yourself and using it as a launching pad for what we want and where we want the community to be. Accountability, male leadership, challenge yourself, be a better version of yourself, and you know what I mean, never stop growing and never stop learning. So like there is no ceiling with that.
All right. So I want to get to a place of, first off, summarizing. I want you to, well, you kind of said what I think the closing remarks were, but is there anything else that you want to leave people with? I know we have a lot of comments, and I ain't gonna say I really anticipated that, but this is absolutely more of a discussion, open discussion, let people share and exchange. And unfortunately, we got a little behind on time. I wanted to leave like 15 minutes for people to be able to engage with you, but you do invite that to your Instagram, right?
Oh yeah. Please feel free to, you can talk about
Yeah.
it.
So with that all said, thank you. Thanks for making the space. Thanks for making the time to show up here and be able to, I mean, do the thing that you do. You talk, you get people thinking, feeling, and everything. So I'm going to share this recording, finish the recording, share this out with the world, whatever. And we will be continuing to go through the symposium. So what this engaged is the Manomaya Kosha, making you think as well as getting emotions stirred up as anticipated. But I ain't gonna get y'all all riled up and built up without going through something to bring us more grounded and back to earth before we go into having our event sponsor come on and share a few words, and then we transition into the section with Mike, where we'll be going into the vision of Maya Kosha and masculinity and vulnerability. So Anthony, appreciate you, bro. Let people know how they can find you.
Uh, Instagram's probably the best way. I am controversy. Um, yeah, yeah,
All right.
willing to discuss. I
Part
do,
two.
yeah, I do FaceTimes and birthday parties. So, you know, hit me up.
So no, part two, I think absolutely has to be one of those things that we do in person, open discussion, like panel, because there are a lot of times like the way things are said, the words that are used, the timing, the context, who's saying it, all of these things play a factor. And I think under the right like panel, under the right leadership and organizations of something like that, we can see like a more structured conversation as well that can get us towards some solutions too. So, all right, I'm gonna get us transitioning, moving forward, and yeah, peace out, my man.
All right.
Me always make this face. There we go.